In the early 1920s, the slopes east of Mount St. Helens were wild, steep, and largely unmapped. Miners, trappers, and small prospecting groups worked the creeks that fed the Lewis River, especially Ape Canyon, a deep gorge carved by the muddy river about 8 miles south of the volcano's summit. The area was thick with lodgepole pine and volcanic rock, accessible only by rough horse trails. Bears and cougars were common. Local Yakima and Klickitat people already had older stories of mountain devils, hair-covered giants that lived on the mountain and hurled stones when angered. By 1924, 5 prospectors from Kelso, Washington, Fred Beck, Marion Smith, Roy Smith, Gabe Lefevre, and John Peterson had staked a gold claim near the canyon head. They built a rough log cabin to store tools and supplies. What followed would become one of the most discussed Bigfoot-type events in American folklore. Events leading up to the siege. Strange tracks. In July 1924, the men reported finding huge, human-like footprints around their claim. Tracks 14 inches long and spaced unusually far apart. They first assumed a prank or a bear with deformed paws. Initial sightings. A few days later, Marion Smith reportedly saw a tall, dark figure watching the party from a ridge. It vanished among the trees. That night, they heard distant, echoing whistling, and what they later described as thumping sounds of rocks striking timber, noises later said to be calls or warnings. On July 10th, Fred Beck claimed that as he and the others crossed a narrow canyon, he saw a large, hairy creature standing upright. Beck fired his rifle. The creature toppled into the canyon below. The men believed they had killed it and returned to their cabin at dusk. The night attack. According to the miners' later statements, the assault began shortly after midnight. They awoke to rocks striking the cabin roof and walls. Heavy thuds shook the structure, followed by hideous screams. Shapes moved outside the small window openings. Several times, hairy arms reportedly reached through gaps between logs. The men fired repeatedly through the cracks, trying to conserve ammunition while barricading the door with sacks of rock. Fred Beck later wrote that the bombardment continued until dawn, the attackers sometimes climbing onto the roof and prying at the chinking between logs. When daylight came, the noises stopped. Outside, they found scattered stones, some the size of a man's fist, on and around the roof. They also claimed to find large footprints encircling the cabin. Shaken and low on ammunition, the prospectors abandoned the claim that morning, hiking 20 miles down to Spirit Lake and on to Kelso to report the incident. The story broke on July 16, 1924, when the Oregonian ran the headline, "Ape Men Attack Prospector's Cabin on Mount St. Helens." Over the next week, newspapers from Seattle to San Francisco reprinted the account. The coverage emphasized hairy wild men and mountain devils, sometimes mixing direct quotes with sensational details. A sheriff's party led by C.C. Berry investigated the site a few days later. Findings of the search party Sheriff Berry confirmed that the men's cabin existed and that stones lay scattered around it, but he found no clear footprints and no signs of a body in the canyon below. He publicly stated he believed a band of mountain pranksters or an overactive imagination was responsible. Locals near Cougar, Washington, remained divided. Some thought bears were to blame. Others quietly linked it to long-standing tribal mountain devil legends. Fred Beck's later account. In 1967, more than 40 years later, Fred Beck published a pamphlet, "I Fought the Ape Men of Mount St. Helens," expanding the story. He described the creatures as 7-foot tall, hair-covered beings with long arms and flat noses, communicating with whistles and stone knocks. He also introduced a spiritual element, suggesting the beings were partly interdimensional rather than purely physical. Researchers generally note that Beck's later version is much embellished compared with the 1924 newspaper statements, but it preserved many core details of the incident. Folklore and possible explanations. 1. Bear-mice identification. Black bears on 2 legs, especially in dim light, can appear humanoid. Bears rolling rocks or tearing at logs could explain much of the commotion. The footprints might have been bear tracks, distorted in volcanic dust. 2. Human prank or vigilante attack. Some historians propose rival prospectors or local youths harassed the miners, throwing rocks from the canyon rim after hearing of the earlier kill. Such pranks were not uncommon in mining camps. 3. Psychological and environmental factors. The isolation, thin air, and intense fear common in remote camps could amplify perceptions. The miners' fear, combined with echoing rock slides or animals on the roof, may have produced a collective panic that later solidified into memory. 4. Folkloric context. The miners were working in a region already steeped in stories of Sasquatch and mountain devils. Their experience fit existing oral motifs: a confrontation with wilderness spirits, a night siege, and escape at dawn. Once published, the story merged seamlessly into the growing 20th century North American Bigfoot tradition.